The human body emerges from the nocturnal fasting cycle in a state of delicate endocrine equilibrium, heavily governed by the dawn phenomenon and the cortisol awakening response. At this precise moment, circulating glucose is tightly managed by hepatic glycogenolysis, and the cellular machinery is primed to heavily oxidize fatty acids for basal metabolic requirements. When you introduce food into this highly sensitive, fasted environment, you are not merely consuming calories. You are deploying chemical messengers that will dictate your systemic metabolism, neurological efficiency, and hormonal stability for the remainder of the day. To understand the profound physiological divergence between consuming a banana versus 2 eggs in the morning, one must bypass the simplistic lens of total caloric intake and examine the exact molecular pathways, enzymatic reactions, and endocrine feedback loops that these two entirely different biological matrices initiate upon entering the human gastrointestinal tract. A banana is essentially a botanical construct, highly concentrated in readily available carbohydrates, presenting a dense payload of both glucose and fructose wrapped in a minimal fiber matrix, especially as it ripens and its resistant starches degrade into simple sugars. When masticated, the enzyme salivary alpha amylase immediately begins cleaving the alpha-1,4 glycosidic bonds of the starches, initiating the conversion of the fruit into a rapidly absorbing glycemic slurry before it even reaches the stomach. Upon passing through the acidic environment of the stomach and entering the highly vascularized duodenum, the resulting monosaccharides are aggressively absorbed by the enterocytes lining the intestinal wall. The glucose is transported via the SGLT1 transporters directly into the mesenteric veins and flushed immediately into the portal vein. As this concentrated wave of glucose hits the systemic circulation, it triggers an immediate and violent metabolic pivot. The beta cells situated within the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas detect the sudden escalation of serum glucose and are forced into rapid exocytosis, dumping massive quantities of insulin into the bloodstream. This is a physiological emergency response. The body views elevated blood glucose not as energy, but as a toxic threat, capable of causing severe osmotic damage to the vascular endothelium. Insulin acts as the biological key, binding to the tyrosine kinase receptors on skeletal muscle and adipose tissue, forcing the translocation of GLUT4 transporters to the cell surface to violently vacuum the glucose from the blood. Simultaneously, the fructose component of the banana bypasses the systemic circulation entirely and is sequestered by the liver through GLUT5 transporters. Because hepatic metabolism of fructose is unregulated by the phosphofructokinase enzyme, the normal checkpoint for energy needs, it overwhelms the hepatic mitochondria. The liver, unable to utilize this massive influx for immediate ATP production, is forced to convert excess carbon substrates directly into triglycerides. This initiates silent, microscopic lipid droplet accumulation within the hepatocytes, laying the invisible groundwork for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. While the liver struggles with fructose, the sheer volume of secreted insulin overcorrects the systemic glycemic curve. This plunges the body into a state of reactive hypoglycemia, usually within 90 to 120 minutes post-ingestion. The brain, requiring a constant supply of energy and possessing virtually zero glucose storage, senses this rapid drop as an acute survival threat. The hypothalamus instantly responds by triggering the adrenal glands to release a secondary wave of stress hormones, specifically epinephrine and cortisol. This is a desperate biological bid to mobilize trapped glucose from the liver and skeletal muscle. This catecholamine surge is clinically experienced as the mid-morning crash, characterized by neurological fatigue, brain fog, and tachycardia. The body experiences an uncontrollable biological craving for more fast-acting carbohydrates to rescue the plunging blood sugar. This locks the individual into an exhausting, destructive cycle of hyperinsulinemia and subsequent hypoglycemia for the remainder of the day. Conversely, introducing 2 whole eggs into the identical fasted morning environment bypasses this insulinogenic panic entirely, initiating an entirely different, highly stabilized endocrine cascade. The egg is a bioevolutionary capsule consisting of complex, complete structural proteins in the albumin and highly bioavailable lipids, vitamins, and cholesterol in the yolk. When this protein-lipid matrix enters the highly acidic environment of the stomach, the hydrochloric acid works to denature the intricate, three-dimensional folding of the egg proteins, allowing the enzyme pepsin to begin methodically cleaving the long peptide chains into smaller polypeptides and individual amino acids. Because there are virtually zero carbohydrates in the egg to trigger an immediate glycemic spike, the passage of this dense chyme into the duodenum stimulates different messengers, primarily cholecystokinin and peptide YY, from the enteroendocrine cells of the intestinal lining. These hormones execute two critical functions. They dramatically slow the rate of gastric emptying, providing a physical sensation of fullness, and they communicate directly via the vagus nerve to the satiety centers in the hypothalamus, inducing a profound, mechanically driven suppression of the appetite hormone ghrelin that lasts for hours. In the pancreas, the absence of a glucose surge keeps beta cells quiet, and insulin levels at their low-fasting baseline. Instead, the slow influx of amino acids stimulates alpha cells to release a specific amount of glucagon. Glucagon acts as the primary signal to mobilize stored energy, serving as the metabolic antagonist to insulin. It instructs the liver to maintain a steady, controlled release of glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. This ensures the brain receives a perfectly calibrated fuel supply without the erratic spikes associated with sugar. With insulin suppressed and glucagon elevated, hormone-sensitive lipase remains highly active within your adipose tissue. This keeps the doors of your fat cells open, allowing for a state of continuous beta oxidation, meaning you actively continue to burn stored body fat for systemic energy well into the afternoon. Beyond the systemic energy regulation, the specific biochemical composition of the egg yolk provides a profound neurometabolic advantage. The yolk is one of the most highly concentrated, bioavailable sources of phosphatidylcholine found in nature. Upon digestion, this choline is absorbed and actively transported across the tightly regulated blood-brain barrier. Once inside the cerebral environment, the neurons utilize this choline as the direct structural precursor for the synthesis of acetylcholine, the primary neurotransmitter responsible for synaptic transmission efficiency, memory encoding, executive function, and sustained cognitive focus. While the banana induces a state of neural starvation and distraction due to the postprandial hypoglycemic crash, the egg provides the exact molecular building blocks required to maintain high-velocity neurochemical signaling without the jittery, erratic side effects of central nervous system stimulants like caffeine. Additionally, the lipid profile of the egg yolk facilitates the absorption of its fat-soluble payload, including lutein and zeaxanthin, which immediately go to work neutralizing oxidative stress within the vascular endothelium and the retina. When we extrapolate the physiological divergence of these two breakfasts over a consecutive 30-day cycle, the morphological and metabolic consequences become clinically stark. The daily ingestion of the banana on an empty stomach essentially trains the human metabolic engine to rely exclusively on exogenous fast-acting sugars. This blunts metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to seamlessly switch between burning glucose and burning fat, and slowly decreases the sensitivity of insulin receptors on the muscle cells due to the daily, repetitive postprandial hyperinsulinemic trauma. Over time, the constant shuttling of fructose to the liver promotes systemic, low-grade inflammation, shifts the lipid profile towards small, dense, highly atherogenic LDL particles, and promotes the gradual accretion of visceral adiposity. The individual remains chemically trapped in a relentless feeding loop, dictated by wildly fluctuating blood glucose dynamics. In absolute contrast, the daily consumption of the complex protein and lipid matrix provided by the two eggs actively engineers deep metabolic flexibility. By maintaining low-fasting insulin levels every morning, the cellular mitochondria are forced to upregulate the enzymatic machinery required to efficiently oxidize lipids. The insulin receptors, spared from the daily chemical bombardment of simple carbohydrates, regain acute, pristine sensitivity, meaning the body will require significantly less insulin to manage the carbohydrates consumed later in the day. The systemic lipid profile stabilizes and improves as the high-quality dietary phospholipids from the yolk facilitate the reverse cholesterol transport mechanism driven by high-density lipoproteins, clearing excess cholesterol from the peripheral tissues and returning it to the liver. The lean muscle mass is preserved and fortified by the daily influx of complete essential amino acids, which optimally stimulate the mammalian target of rapamycin pathway for cellular repair without the need for an insulin spike. Ultimately, the biological response to these two different breakfasts proves that the human body does not merely count calories, it reacts to chemical information. Choosing the egg over the banana is the decision to strip away the erratic, high-sugar, inflammatory start to your day and replace it with structural, biological necessity, aligning your endocrine habits with the fundamental evolutionary requirements of your physiology, forcing your body to abandon volatile carbohydrate dependency and locking it into a state of cognitive endurance, durable satiety, and permanent fat-burning metabolic homeostasis.